The storm howled through the forest, drowning every trace of her hurried footsteps. Blood pounded in her ears as if it meant to give her away. Behind her, shadows moved, the hunters who would not stop until she was caught. Ahead, the cabin's faint light flickered like salvation, or perhaps a trap. She pushed forward, breath ragged, unaware that the soldier inside was about to change both their lives forever. The cabin smelled of smoke and iron, a scent that clung to the air like a warning. Ilara pressed her trembling hands against the wooden doorframe, rain dripping from her hair, eyes wide as though the shadows themselves might leap to capture her. Inside, a fire crackled low, casting orange light on a figure seated in the corner. A man, broad-shouldered, unmoving, his face half hidden by shadow. For a heartbeat, she thought he hadn't noticed her. Then his eyes lifted, steel gray, sharp as blades. "Close the door," he said. His voice was deep, unhurried, yet it carried the weight of command. Ilara hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but outside was death. The storm, the hunters, the night itself. She shut the door with a shuddering breath, leaning back against it as if to keep the world out. Kyle studied her, his jaw tight, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife that lay on the table beside him. "You don't belong here," he muttered, not unkindly, but with the coolness of a man who trusted no one. "I just need a place to wait out the storm," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'll leave at dawn." Her words trembled, though she tried to sound strong. The flickering firelight revealed the dirt on her cheeks, the bruise at her temple, the way her clothes clung to her rain-soaked body. Kyle noticed, not with desire, but with the practiced eye of a soldier trained to read suffering. "Storm will last longer than dawn," he said flatly. He leaned back, though his eyes never left her. "And people don't come this deep into the forest unless they're running from something." Ilara stiffened. His words cut too close to truth. She forced her gaze to the fire, refusing to answer. Kyle let the silence stretch, broken only by the hiss of rain against the roof. He wanted to tell her to leave, to vanish into the night and take her troubles with her. But something in her posture, the way she clenched her fists, the way she stood as though ready to be struck, stopped him. He had seen that stance before. Soldiers who had lost everything. Prisoners clinging to scraps of dignity. He exhaled slowly. "Sit, warm yourself," she blinked, startled. Then with cautious steps she crossed the cabin and crouched near the fire. Her hands hovered over the flames, shaking violently from cold. For the first time in days, warmth seeped into her skin, but her relief was laced with fear. She could feel Kyle's gaze on her, heavy, unyielding. He was no ordinary woodsman. His movements, his silence, the sharpness in his tone. This was a man forged in violence. Ilara swallowed hard. If he learned who she truly was, if he discovered what blood stained her hands, would he still allow her to stay? The storm outside raged louder, rattling the windows. Ilara drew closer to the fire, whispering almost to herself, "They'll find me soon." Kyle's head lifted at that, his eyes narrowing. "Who?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. She could not tell him. Not yet. Instead, silence filled the cabin again, thick as smoke. Kyle leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes pinned on her as though he might pull the truth from her silence. The fire popped, sending sparks leaping upward, and Ilara flinched. He noticed the twitch in her muscles, the way she braced as though she expected violence at any moment. "You're not a thief," he said finally, his voice low, more observation than question. "Not dressed like that. And not a villager either. They'd never wander this far." Ilara kept her eyes on the flames. Her pulse thundered in her ears. One wrong word, one misplaced truth, and this man could deliver her straight into the hands of those who hunted her. Yet something about his voice, that grave calm, edged with weariness, told her he was no friend to the men who rode in pursuit of her. "You ask too many questions," she whispered. He almost smiled, but it was a bitter thing. Questions keep people alive. A gust of wind struck the cabin, rattling the shutters. Ilara jumped again, her hand flying to her chest. Gawil's gaze followed the motion, reading her fear like an open book. "Whoever you're running from." He picked up the knife from the table, testing its edge with his thumb. "They won't stop just because you found walls and a roof." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to deny, but the truth pressed hard against her ribs. He was right. Outside, the storm roared louder, masking the sound at first. But then, faint, buried within the thunder, came the crunch of hooves against wet earth. Ilara froze. Her head snapped toward the door. Kyle noticed instantly. His eyes narrowed. "So I was right." "No." Her voice cracked. "Not here. Not so soon." She rose to her feet, trembling, her gaze darting toward the single window as if she might leap through it. But Kale stood before she could move. A wall of muscle and command. "Stay down." The words carried the authority of a soldier who had once ordered men into battle. His tone left no space for refusal. Ilara sank back, chest heaving. Her hands clenched together so tightly the nails bit into her palms. She could hear them now. Voices riding with the storm, cruel laughter carried on the wind. "Spread out." She couldn't have gone far. Kale's eyes flickered toward the door, then back to her. He saw the terror etched into every line of her face, the desperation in her trembling body. And for the first time he hesitated. He had sworn to keep the world outside, to shut himself away from war, from blood, from the endless tide of men chasing one another to graves. But now, war had found his doorstep again, in the form of this broken, defiant woman. Ilara whispered, almost pleading, "If they find me, they'll kill me." The words hung in the air, heavier than the storm. Kyle clenched his jaw, torn between instinct and apathy. He could send her out. He could end this problem before it consumed him. But her voice, her eyes, they pulled at the buried-in fragments of himself he had long tried to smother. The horsemen drew closer. Their torches glowed faintly through the trees, bobbing like fiery specters in the night. Kale moved to the table and blew out the lantern, plunging the cabin into shadow. Only the faint glow of the fire remained. He turned back to her, voice low, sharp. "Stay quiet. Don't breathe louder than the storm." Ilara nodded, clutching her knees to her chest. Her heart thrashed like a bird in a cage. Outside, the hoofbeats stopped. A silence followed, more dreadful than the storm itself. Then came a voice harsh and commanding, right outside the cabin door. "Search the place." "She's here." Ilara's blood ran cold. Her wide eyes darted to Kale, who stood unmoving in the firelight, knife in hand, waiting. The pounding at the cabin door rattled the wood, sending shivers through the walls. Ilara's breath caught in her throat, every muscle coiled tight. She pressed herself deeper into the corner's shadows, clutching her knees so hard her knuckles whitened. Kyle stood still, knife in hand, his expression unreadable. The pounding came again, followed by a voice, gruff, sharp, carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Open up." "We're searching for a fugitive, a woman." Ilara shut her eyes, silently praying. She didn't dare look at Kyle, didn't dare see whether he would betray her. Kale moved with slow precision, setting the knife down but keeping it within reach. He crossed to the door, his heavy boots echoing against the wood floor. For a moment he simply stood there, staring at the door as though weighing the storm beyond it. Then he lifted the latch. The door swung open, wind and rain sweeping into the cabin. 3 men stood outside, cloaked and armed, torches spitting against the storm. Their eyes narrowed as they saw him. A tall figure, broad and unyielding, filling the doorway. "What do you want?" Kale asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. The leader stepped forward, sneering. "We're hunting a woman. Escaped prisoner, dangerous. Have you seen her?" Kale's gaze didn't flicker. "No one's here," Ilara's pulse thundered. Her nails dug into her palms, blood beading where she broke the skin. She bit down on her lip to keep from gasping. One of the soldiers leaned past Kale, peering inside. The firelight revealed little, but suspicion darkened his face. "Mind if we take a look?" Kale's jaw tightened. He shifted, filling the doorway with his frame. "I mind." The man blinked, caught off guard. "You'd refuse the king's search?" Kale's eyes hardened, a storm unto themselves. "This is my home." "You'll not enter." The leader chuckled darkly, though unease flickered in his eyes. "Big words. Dangerous words. Maybe you're hiding her." Silence stretched. Kale didn't move, didn't blink. His presence alone pressed against them like an unspoken threat. For the first time, the hunters faltered. Behind him, Ilara barely breathed, watching the soldier she barely knew stand as an unmovable wall between her and death. The storm howled behind the hunters, but inside the cabin, silence pressed heavier than thunder. Guil stood firm in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest now, as though daring them to test him. The leader sneered, spit hitting the mud at Kale's feet. "A man living alone in the woods. Always a secret to hide. His eyes narrowed. Step aside. Kale's voice was even, controlled, the calm before a blade is drawn. No. The word hit like iron. Ilara felt it in her chest, sharp and unyielding. One of the younger soldiers shifted uneasily, torchlight flickering across his nervous face. Sir, he doesn't look like he's lying. Maybe. Sir, he doesn't look like he's lying. Maybe. Shut up, the leader snapped, cutting him off. He stepped closer, so close Kale could smell the damp leather of his cloak. Do you know the punishment for obstructing royal business? Kale didn't flinch. I know the price of letting armed men violate my home. The tension crackled, heavier than the storm outside. The leader's hand hovered near his sword hilt. Kale's own knife lay on the table just within arm's reach, and Ilara's breath caught as she realized how close they were to blood being spilled. Kyle leaned forward just slightly, his voice dropping into a growl that seemed to come from the very marrow of him. If you want to search, you'll have to force your way in, and you won't leave whole. The words froze the space between them. The younger soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. The leader's face hardened, but beneath his bravado flickered doubt. Doubt at the man before him. The way Kale carried himself not as a recluse, but as someone who had faced down death 100 times and won. Finally, the leader spat again, stepping back. Not worth wasting steel on a hermit. He jabbed a finger toward Kyle. But if she's here, soldier, and we find out you lied, we'll burn this place to the ground. Kyle didn't move, didn't blink. Then you'd better pray she's not. The men turned, torches vanishing into the curtain of rain. Their voices drifted back through the storm. Curses, threats, the promise of return. Hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the night. Only then did Kale close the door, sliding the latch with a steady hand. For a moment he stood there, his back to Ilara, shoulders rigid as stone. The silence was suffocating. Finally she spoke, barely more than a whisper. You didn't give me up. Kyle turned, his eyes shadowed, unreadable. I should have. Her breath caught, the words cutting deeper than she expected. She shrank back, shame and gratitude twisting in her chest like a knife. Then why didn't you? He didn't answer immediately. He crossed to the table, picking up the knife again, spinning it in his hand before setting it down. His gaze met hers at last, gray and cold as winter steel. Because I've seen enough men hunted like animals. Tonight I wasn't going to watch it happen again. Ilara lowered her head, tears burning in her eyes but refusing to fall. Her body trembled, not from cold this time, but from the weight of what he'd done. He had chosen to stand between her and death, and in doing so he had drawn himself into her war. The storm outside raged on, relentless. But inside the cabin, a storm of another kind had taken root. A bond forged not in trust, but in survival. Ilara knew one thing with painful clarity. Kyle was no longer just a stranger. He was her shield, and perhaps her only chance to live another day. The cabin walls creaked against the storm, each groan sounding like a whisper of warning. Ilara sat by the fire, knees drawn to her chest, her gaze fixed on the flames as though they might offer answers. Kale moved with quiet precision, placing logs on the fire, his every motion measured. He had barely spoken since the hunters left. The silence between them was thick, stretching taut like a rope ready to snap. Finally, Ilara broke it. You could have given me up. Kyle didn't look at her. I still could. The words struck hard. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself not to flinch. Then why didn't you? His jaw flexed, but he didn't answer right away. He crouched near the fire, staring into the embers as if they might burn away the truth. Maybe I'm a fool. Maybe I don't like being told what to do. Or maybe I just didn't want blood spilled in my home. Her lips parted, but no reply came. She hugged herself tighter. Gratitude warred with fear. Gratitude for his protection. Fear that at any moment he might change his mind. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Kale finally turned his head, his gray eyes piercing hers. Who are you really? Ilara froze. Her heartbeat stumbled, then raced. She could lie. She could invent some pitiful story. But the weight of his stare, the steadiness of it, made lying feel impossible. She dropped her gaze. Someone you don't want to know? Kyle studied her for a long moment, then leaned back, exhaling heavily. He didn't push further, but the question lingered in the air like smoke. Minutes stretched into hours. The storm softened, but inside the cabin the tension only thickened. Ilara's body sagged with exhaustion. She hadn't slept in days. Sleep meant being caught, being killed. But warmth seeped into her bones, dragging her toward surrender. Her head dipped, eyes fluttering closed. A whisper slipped from her lips unguarded. "They'll never stop." "Not until I'm dead," Kyle stiffened. His eyes sharpened. She stirred, murmuring again, half in dream, half in memory. "The king's men." Blood on their hands. All of it burned. Kale's blood chilled. The king's men. Not just hunters, not common soldiers. Royal pursuit. His home had become a battlefield the moment she stepped inside. He rose slowly, his hand instinctively finding the knife on the table. His gaze locked on her fragile form curled near the fire. Her face softened in sleep for the first time since she arrived. For a long, harrowing moment, Kale stood there in the half-light, torn between two instincts, to drive her out and reclaim his silence, or to stand against the crown itself for a woman whose secrets could destroy them both. The firelight flickered across the blade in his hand as his decision loomed. Kyle's grip on the knife tightened. The steel caught the firelight, gleaming like the question gnawing at him. His cabin had been a sanctuary from blood and duty, but this woman had dragged shadows across its threshold. Shadows wearing the crown's colors. He should have ended it now, before dawn brought her hunters back. A single choice and his life would remain his own. Yet as he looked at her, curled in uneasy sleep, he felt a pull he couldn't name. Her face, stripped of defiance in slumber, revealed the truth. She was young, too young to carry so much fear in her bones. The bruise at her temple, the trembling of her lips as she dreamed. These were not marks of a criminal, but of prey forced to run until there was nothing left but desperation. Kale lowered the blade slowly, the war inside him raging quieter but no less fierce. He set it down on the table and moved to the window. Outside, the forest lay drenched in silver moonlight, the rain thinning into mist. The hunters were out there, circling, waiting. He knew their kind, disciplined, ruthless. They would return, and when they did, they would not knock. Behind him, Ilara stirred. Her eyes blinked open, hazy from sleep, catching the faint glint of the knife on the table. Her breath hitched and she pushed herself upright. "You were going to kill me," she whispered. Kyle turned, expression unreadable. "I thought about it." The honesty cut sharper than any blade. Her eyes burned, but no tears fell. "Then why didn't you?" He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Because I've killed enough for one lifetime." The silence between them was heavy, thick with something unspoken. Ilara hugged her knees tighter, searching his face for betrayal and finding only exhaustion. The same exhaustion she carried in her own bones. "You don't know what they'll do if they find me here," she said softly, her voice breaking. "What they've already done." Her words faltered, choked back by memory. Kyle crouched down so they were eye level. His gaze, steady and gray, anchored her trembling. "Then tell me," he said, "so I can decide if you're worth the fight you've dragged to my door." Her lips parted, but the words tangled in her throat. She wanted to tell him, to spill every scar, every crime of the crown, but the habit of silence held fast. She shook her head, tears finally slipping free. Kyle didn't push further. Instead, he stood, turning back toward the fire. "Sleep. You'll need your strength." "They'll come again." Ilara watched him, her chest aching. He was a soldier, a stranger, a man who might yet send her to her death. And still, for the first time in days, she felt the faintest flicker of safety. Fragile, dangerous, but real. She lowered herself back onto the blanket, closing her eyes, though sleep came slowly. Doyle remained by the fire, unmoving, a silent sentinel with ghosts in his eyes. When dawn broke, neither of them had truly rested, but something had shifted in the night. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of a fragile thread binding their fates together. And outside, beyond the trees, the sound of distant horns shattered the morning stillness. The hunters were calling to one another. The hunt had begun again. The morning broke with horns. They tore through the mist, sharp and hollow, rolling across the forest like the cries of beasts. Ilara jerked awake, her heart hammering, eyes wide and wild. She scrambled upright, clutching the blanket to her chest, her gaze darting to the door. Kyle was already there, standing in silence, one hand resting on the wooden frame. His gray eyes were fixed on the tree line, his face hard as carved stone. "They're moving in," he said. Ilara's breath shuddered. "They know." Kyle didn't turn. "Not yet, but they will. They're closing the circle." The horns sounded again, closer this time, joined by the faint bark of commands. Ilara felt her stomach twist, bile rising. Her refuge, the cabin, the fire, even the silence between her and Kyle, was unraveling with the dawn. "We can't stay," Kyle continued. His voice flat, certain. Ilara shook her head. "Panic breaking through. Where would we go?" "They'll find us. They always find me." Finally, he looked at her. The steel in his gaze struck like a blow. "If we stay, they'll burn this place down with us inside. If we move, we stand a chance." She wanted to argue, to scream, to tell him she'd rather die here than keep running. But the way he stood, unshaken before the sound of the hunt, silenced her. He was not a man of hope, but of survival. Kyle crossed the room in 3 strides. He pulled a worn satchel from beneath his bed, filling it with flint rope, a water skin. His movements were swift, practiced, each gesture echoing the soldier he had once been. "You've done this before," Ilara murmured. He didn't answer. Instead, he slung the satchel across his shoulder, then tossed a cloak toward her. "Put that on. You'll need the cover." Her hands trembled as she drew the cloak around her shoulders. It was too large, smelling faintly of smoke and iron. The scent of him. Kale doused the fire with a splash of water. Smoke hissed upward, filling the cabin with a final sigh. For Ilara, it felt like the death of safety itself. He opened the door and held out a hand. His voice was low but firm. "Stay close. Don't make a sound unless I tell you." Ilara hesitated only a moment before her fingers brushed his. His grip was calloused, steady, and in that brief contact she felt something anchor her panic. Together they slipped into the mist. The forest was eerily quiet save for the horns in the distance. Kale moved like shadow, every step deliberate, his ears tuned to the faintest rustle of leaves. Ilara followed, struggling to match his silence, her breath sharp in her throat. Then voices, close. Men speaking in low tones, boots crunching over wet earth. Kyle froze, raising a hand. Ilara stopped instantly, her body tense as a bowstring. Through the fog, dark figures moved. A patrol sweeping wide, their torches faint blurs of orange. Ilara's heart slammed. Too close. Too many. Kyle's hand closed around her arm, pulling her down into the damp ferns. She gasped at the sudden closeness, the weight of his body shielding hers as the soldiers drew near. Through the mist, their commander's voice rang clear, merciless. "Search every tree. Burn the cabin to the ground tonight. She won't leave these woods alive." Ilara's breath hitched. Beside her, Kale's grip tightened, not in fear, but in fury. The patrol's boots crunched closer, every step reverberating in Ilara's skull like the ticking of a clock counting down to her end. She buried her face against the damp earth, struggling to quiet her breaths, but each inhale felt like a shout against the silence. Kyle's body pressed firm against hers, shielding her from view. She could feel the steadiness of him, the unyielding stillness of a man trained to wait even with death brushing his shoulder. The commander's voice carried again through the fog. "Torch the cabin by dusk. She'll come running when her hole is gone." The soldiers laughed darkly, their torches bobbing as they moved through the undergrowth. One of them veered dangerously close, his boots stopping just feet away from where Ilara and Kyle lay hidden. Ilara's lungs seized. Her whole body trembled. Kyle's hand slid over hers, firm, commanding. Still, the soldier paused, scanning the mist, his torchlight flaring orange against the haze. Ilara could hear the jingle of his armor, the wet slap of mud under his boots. For one endless heartbeat, she was sure he had spotted them. Then the commander barked an order, and the soldier turned, trudging back to rejoin the patrol. Their figures dissolved into the mist, their voices fading with the storm. Kyle exhaled slowly, releasing her hand. "Move," he whispered. They crept deeper into the forest, Kyle leading, Ilara stumbling after him. Branches whipped against her cloak. Mud sucked at her boots, but she didn't dare make a sound. Kale's movements were swift, precise. The habits of a soldier returning to him as naturally as breath. At last, when the horns had grown faint, Kale pulled her into the hollow of a fallen tree. He crouched low, scanning the trees, his breath steady. Ilara collapsed beside him, her chest heaving. "They'll burn it," she whispered, voice breaking. "You're home. Because of me." Kyle's gaze was fixed outward, his jaw set. It was never a home. Just walls to keep the world out? They want to burn it? Let them. The bitterness in his tone startled her. Then why live there at all? His eyes finally flicked to her, gray and sharp. Because the forest doesn't ask questions. Because silence doesn't betray you. He leaned closer, his voice a low rasp. Until you. Her chest tightened, guilt pressing heavy. But beneath it a strange heat stirred, not anger, not fear, but the ache of someone who hadn't been looked at, truly seen in a long time. Ilara lowered her eyes. "If you want me gone, say it. I'll run. I'll keep running until they cut you down," Kyle interrupted. His tone wasn't cruel but final, undeniable. "Running won't save you. Not anymore." She swallowed, her voice trembling. "Then what will?" Kale didn't answer immediately. He sheathed his knife, his hand resting on the hilt as though it belonged there, as though it had never left his side. His silence was answer enough. Ilara realized with a shiver that he was no longer hiding from the soldier he had been. The horns, the patrols, the fire in his eyes. They had pulled him back into a war he'd sworn never to fight. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of a vow. "If they're hunting you, they'll have to go through me first." Ilara's breath caught, her heart twisting painfully. Gratitude and terror surged in equal measure. She opened her mouth, but the words failed. All she could do was look at him. This man who had been a stranger yesterday, now standing between her and the crown itself. The horns blared again in the distance, echoing through the valley, and in the hollow of that fallen tree, Ilara knew with certainty Kale's war had just begun. The forest glowed with fire. From the hollow where Kale had led her, Ilara could see the smoke unfurling into the twilight sky, thick, black, endless. The cabin was gone. She pressed a hand against her mouth, her throat tightening. "It's burning." Her voice cracked on the word, trembling with guilt. "Kyle, I don't." The single word was sharp, not cruel, but final. Kale's eyes never left the horizon. His face illuminated in flickers of orange. His expression was unreadable. Not rage, not grief, but something harder. Something quieter. Ilara's heart twisted. "I destroyed the only place he had left." She turned away, hugging her arms around herself. The forest's chill bit at her skin, but the cold came from deeper within. "You should have let me go. If not for me, you'd still have your home." Kyle finally looked at her then, his gaze steady, unflinching. "That cabin was never a home. Just wood and walls. Silence I mistook for peace." Ilara blinked, stunned by the calm in his voice. "But you lived there. For years." "Existing isn't living," he said simply. The words sank into her chest like stones. For so long she had dreamed of peace, a place to hide, a corner of the world untouched by pursuit. But in his tone, she heard the truth. Walls could keep the world out, but they could also keep life from ever getting in. The fire roared in the distance, and Kale turned his back on it. "Come. The forest gives us more than walls ever could." He led her down the slope to a clearing where the hush of water reached them. A narrow river wound through the trees, its surface silver in the dying light. Kale crouched by the bank, cupping water in his hand, drinking. "This stream runs north," he said. "It will cover our tracks, make it harder for patrols to follow." Ilara knelt beside him, her reflection trembling in the current. She could hardly think past the ache in her chest. "And if they do follow?" Kale's jaw flexed. "Then we make them regret it." There was no bravado in his voice, no flare of pride. Just a soldier's certainty, sharpened by years of war. Ilara shivered, watching him. Even in stillness, he carried the weight of battles she could only imagine. He wasn't just a man hiding in the woods. He was someone forged for conflict, whether he wanted it or not. He noticed her staring. "What?" She shook her head quickly. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. The silence between them pulsed with something unspoken, heavy as the smoke rising behind them. Kale broke it by pulling a knife from his belt, pressing it into her palm. Ilara froze, the metal cold against her skin. You'll need it," Kyle said. "Out here you don't get second chances." Her throat tightened as she looked down at the blade, then up at him. He wasn't teaching her because he believed she could fight. He was teaching her because he refused to let her die without a chance. Ilara gripped the knife, the weight of it strange in her hand. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't Kyle. But something in his eyes, something unyielding, made her nod. Good, Kyle murmured, almost to himself. And for the first time, the fire behind them didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning. The knife felt too heavy in Ilara's hand, awkward and foreign. She turned it over, the dull gleam of steel catching the dying light. Kale watched her quietly, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he stepped closer and adjusted her grip, his hand closing firmly around hers. Not like that, he murmured. Hold it steady. Blade out. Always know where the edge is. His fingers were calloused, his touch steady, guiding hers with the ease of someone who had shown men how to wield weapons before. Ilara swallowed, her breath quickening. He was so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the faint smell of smoke and pine on his cloak. She tried to steady her grip, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. I'll never be like you. Kale's gaze locked on hers, sharp and unwavering. You don't need to be me. You just need to live. The words struck something deep inside her, a reminder that survival wasn't about strength, but will, and she did want to live, desperately. Kale stepped back, pulling a small branch from the ground. He snapped it in half and tossed one piece to her. Show me how you'd strike. And tossed one piece to her. Show me how you'd strike. Ilara hesitated, then lunged forward, clumsy and too slow. Kale sidestepped easily, catching her wrist. Again, frustration burned in her cheeks. She tried again and again, but each attempt ended with Kale disarming her. His movements fluid, economical. He wasn't mocking her, he was testing her resolve. Finally, breathless, Ilara snapped, You knew I'd fail. Kale's voice was low, steady. I needed to see if you'd keep trying. Her chest rose and fell, her knuckles white around the stick. And in his eyes she saw something soften. Not pity, but recognition. He knew what it meant to keep fighting long after the body gave out. Slowly, Kale lowered his own stick. You're not weak, Ilara, just untrained. Weakness is giving up. You haven't. The words stunned her, silencing the storm of self-doubt. For years she had been told she was fragile, helpless, a girl to be caged or hunted. But in Kale's voice she heard something different, a truth she wanted to believe. Her shoulders loosened, and for the first time she managed a small, unsteady smile. Kale saw it, and something flickered in his expression, something he quickly buried. He turned away, gathering wood for a fire. That's enough for tonight. They built the flames together beneath the canopy of trees, the crackle filling the silence between them. Ilara sat wrapped in her cloak, watching Kale's profile as the firelight painted his features in gold and shadow. He seemed carved from stone. Yet in the shifting light she glimpsed the cracks, the weariness etched deep, the loneliness he carried like armor. Without thinking, she spoke. You were a leader once. Kale froze, his eyes narrowing. What makes you say that? The way you move. The way you see everything. You don't just watch the world. You measure it. You command it. Her voice softened. No one learns that alone. For a long moment, Kyle said nothing. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the night. Then he exhaled slowly, staring into the flames. I was once a commander, until I led men into a slaughter that wasn't theirs to fight. His voice was low, hoarse as if pulled from a place he had long buried. I buried too many brothers under banners that weren't worth their blood. Ilara's breath caught. She wanted to reach for him, to say something that could pull him from the shadows of memory. But before she could, Kale's gaze shifted to her, hardening once more. Get some rest, he said quietly. Tomorrow will be harder. Ilara obeyed, lying down near the fire, but her thoughts burned hotter than the flames. She had seen more of him tonight than he had shown anyone in years. And though the past haunted him, though the walls around his heart stood tall, she could feel it. The soldier's silence was beginning to crack, and through those cracks something dangerous was stirring.